I think our brains are wired to just worry about things that haven't happened yet. That sort of stops us from enjoying the moment. Worry less, things will work out. Just work hard.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 81 of the Clarineat podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry. Today on the show, it's the first in a several-part series where I'll be featuring short lightning round conversations with Clarineat listeners from all around the world. I just know that a lot of the people out there listening to the show have a lot of great things to say. A lot of them are very skilled clarinet players and teachers in their own right, and some of them are students just starting their career. But I wanted to hear from all these different people, all these different diverse backgrounds, and hear what their answers are to the lightning round questions. I got this concept idea a few episodes ago when I aired the compilation. I think it was Charles Nidick, Ricardo Morales, a couple other people were in there with their extended lightning round versions that had previously been only for Patreon backers. I just thought to myself how great it would be to have a couple more episodes like that with short features from different people. So if you're wondering how these people were selected, all they did was join the Clarineat Facebook community, and I put up a call for people to register for time slots for short interviews to appear on the show. If you want to be around for the next time something like this happens, feel free to join. You can search on Facebook for Clarineat Community and request access through there. It's completely free, and I just sort of post questions and invites to things like this as they come up. If you have any feedback about how this went, or if you'd like to see more like this or less like this, send along all feedback, even just to say hi, to feedback@clarineat.com. Detailed show notes for today's episode can be found at clarineat.com/81. That's the number 81. And we'll get started right after this short message from our sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds. Thank you so much for listening.
Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit d'addario.com/woodwinds.
So I'm here today with Amie Ma, who is another clarinetist and podcast listener I've had the chance to meet in real life. Thanks for coming on the show, Amie.
Thanks, Sean. I'm really happy to be here.
So where are you in the world, and how did you find out about the Clarineat podcast?
I am in Southern California in LA, and I actually heard about the podcast through you. I met you at the Clarinet Fest in 2016 in Lawrence, Kansas City.
That's right, with Eric Salazar, the improv session.
That was a lot of fun. Oh, man.
Absolutely. For anyone interested, you can still watch that on YouTube. I think can't remember if he put it online or if I put it online, but someone put it online, and it's up there now forever. So.
I know. Oh, man.
Tell me a bit more about yourself. What do you do clarinet-wise?
I teach private lessons. I am also a music teacher in the public schools. I teach from kindergarten through 8th grade. I teach general music. I teach strings and woodwinds from grades 3 to 5. And then I teach band and orchestra for grades 6 through 8. So I teach elementary and middle school music.
That's great. So something must have founded your passion for music. So what piece of music or album changed your life irreversibly?
Well, I would say it was Eddie Daniels' Breakthrough album, coupled with his Vivaldi's 5 Seasons. I listened to those albums at the same time. So it feels like it's one album, but it's really 2.
I skipped a question here, which I've never done before. If I were to walk over to a music stand right now, what would I find on it?
You would find James Moody's solo of There Will Never Be Another You. It's his tenor sax solo. So that's what you would find.
Very cool. And you're playing that on tenor sax, or you
Yes.
transcribed it for clarinet? Or okay, cool.
Well, I do it. I do both, but I'm trying to also work on my sax skills. So also in tenor sax.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
If you could play any instrument other than the clarinet, what would it be and why?
I don't know if I would say another instrument, but I would say I would love to learn how to sing. I don't know if I would want to necessarily learn another instrument, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's funny. That was my answer when I did the lightning round a couple days ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think clarinet's such a vocal instrument, so it's almost a good compromise. But
Right.
But yeah, there's something about that connection which I think I would also enjoy. If you could go back in time and meet any musician, who would it be and why?
I would meet Joe Allard. And Joe Allard, he is a saxophone and clarinetist, and he was regarded highly back in the day, and he taught many of the greatest musicians today. And I thought what was interesting was he taught at a time where I think saxophone wasn't quite considered at the same level as clarinet, or there were very few people studying it very seriously at maybe conservatory. But Joe Allard, he actually taught clarinet and saxophone at Juilliard, which, I found very interesting, because to be able to teach those two instruments at such a high level at that time, it was, not common. So I would love to actually meet him and see what he's like and ask him a bunch of questions.
I think Ed Jaffe actually studied with him. And,
wow.
Yeah, I think Ed Jaffe was featured on episodes 17, 18, and 19 of the podcast, because once we got going, we just had a huge conversation and it had to break into 3 episodes. So that's a great person. Yeah, good choice. While we're back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would tell myself, worry less, because things will work out. I think our brains are wired to just worry about things that haven't happened yet. And that sort of stops us from enjoying the moment.
Yes.
And it's easier said than done. But I would tell my 21-year-old self, worry less. Things will work out. Just work hard.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think biologically it does make sense that we worry so much because, think about what life was like 15, 20,000 years ago,
Oh, yeah. Right. Our brains are not meant to be happy, so to speak.
Yeah, and sort of
it's meant to survive. Yeah.
Like my biggest stress this morning, just coming down to the computer here and doing these interviews and making sure I have a cup of coffee. Like I didn't have to fend off a lion on the way. And
right. That's actually, our brains are different than what we have to do now. Like we worry more.
Yeah, I bet our brains are evolved. I'll have to have a neuroscientist on at some point. I actually know one.
Oh, why don't you do that? Yeah, that'd be great for everybody.
That'd be really interesting. Yeah, the way the mind has evolved musically too. Like I wonder if our brains now have more capacity for music than back in the day when, all there was maybe a stick on a rock. It's might be evolving or something.
I don't know. I think the years today and the years maybe 50 years ago, it was already different.
Interesting topic.
Yeah.
Speaking of advice, what was the best advice that you ever received and who gave it to you?
It's actually very simple. Work hard and be nice to others.
I like that.
Yeah.
That is very simple. And it kind of, everything sort of fits into that as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What is one book that everyone should read?
I like Marcel Tabito's How Do You Expect to Play the Oboe If You Can't Peel a Mushroom? I think it's a great book. Yeah. I don't know if you heard of it.
I've never heard of it. Is it actually about like peeling mushrooms?
It's actually not. It's actually about an oboe player, about his contribution to the American style of woodwind playing. He actually made a methodology on phrasing and expression. He has a sort of like a number system of how you can approach phrasing. So I think from what I know, this is like the first real methodology of how to teach to be expressive as opposed to just naturally being expressive.
Yeah, many people, you either have it or you don't. Many people think you either have it or you don't.
Yeah, and so his name is Marcel Tabito. That's the oboe player. He actually is he lived around the same time as Daniel Bernard. And there's a lot, if you read the book, there's a lot of parallels between all the woodwind players of the time. So that book is by an author named Layla Storch, who studied with Marcel Tabito. And I think another great book to read after that is called Sound in Motion by David McGill, which gives you more of the numbering system in the book. Yeah.
Cool. How many clarinets do you own?
Well, I have an R13 clarinet, B flat, and then I have an A clarinet, a green line R13 clarinet, and then I just acquired a metal clarinet from an estate sale.
Oh, that's very cool. I've always wanted one of those, actually, just to test
Yeah, it's
out.
actually, the hard thing about metal clarinets is that they usually are not in good condition, but this one is in really good condition, actually plays. So I was really lucky.
Yeah, many of those have become lamps. I would say the hardest thing about metal clarinets is the metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty good. Well, thanks so much for coming on for this little mini lightning round episode, and I definitely hope to have the chance to run into you again. And any last words before we go for the audience?
No, I'm happy to talk to you, and I hope people can get something out of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amie, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I really am excited to check out those books that you were mentioning. This experience gave me an idea. I'd like to start a Clarineat book club. So keep your eye peeled for that. In the next upcoming few episodes, I'm going to be announcing some details about that and maybe selecting the first book. And what I might do is either interview the author of the book if they're still alive, or if I can get in touch with them after we all read it, or I'll chat with someone else, maybe a co-host, about how that the book maybe worked out. And I'd love to invite some listener feedback in that regard as well. So if you're like me, I imagine your reading lists are getting really, really long from listening to the podcast, or in my case, talking to guests on the podcast. I just find that everyone has such a great book to recommend, and I never know where to start. Just one more quick note about this. If you ever do hear a book you'd like to read mentioned on the podcast, usually I link to it in the show notes, and this helps support the production of the podcast if you click on that link. You can do this either by joining Audible and getting a free trial, or you can actually directly click on the book and purchase it from Amazon. But for now, let's move on to the next featured listener. So I'm here today on the podcast with Catina Franklin Sweedy, who is yet another clarinetist I've had the chance to meet in person and listener of the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So first off, where in the world are you now, and how did you discover the Clarineat podcast?
So I'm in Woodbridge, Virginia now, outside of Washington, D.C., and I believe I discovered the Clarineat podcast on the International Clarinetist Discussion Group on Facebook.
Ah, very cool. So tell me a little more about yourself. What do you do there in D.C. with the clarinet?
So I run a busy clarinet studio. I have about 25 students at this point. I also run the George Mason University Clarinet Academy in the summer. And I have a YouTube channel that started out just for my students, but it's looking like it's reaching kids from all over the world. So that's a lot of fun, too. It's called the Clarinet Project.
You know, I've been meaning to have you on the podcast for quite some time about that Clarinet Project and your teaching. So we should find time here in the new year to do that right away.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Thank you.
If I were to walk over to your music stand right now, what would I find on it?
You would find a clarinet quartet version of Jingle Bells, a jazzy arrangement.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can't see it from here. I also have Mele Kalika Maka for clarinet choir on my stand now. Those are my next two clarinet channel projects for YouTube.
Excellent. What piece of music or album changed your life irreversibly?
That's an easy one. I was at my aunt's house. She's an artist. So imagine the setting of walking into a room filled with plants and oil paintings on canvases. And she was listening to Eddie Daniels' Breakthrough, and it was solfeggetto, and it blew my mind. I was 16 years old. I just heard band music up until that point. I'd never heard anything like it. I was hooked.
Have you met Eddie Daniels? You met him this summer.
I've met him a couple times. I've seen him at master classes through the years and talked to him.
That's wonderful. Of course, Eddie Daniels is a huge inspiration for many clarinetists, so it's a good choice.
Yeah.
If you could play any instrument other than the clarinet, which would it be and why?
That's a great question. I got a guitar about 14 years ago when I was pregnant with my daughter, because I envisioned myself sitting around the campfire playing folk music and maybe some bluegrass and things like that. And it's still sitting in my studio. Once I had my daughter, I realized that I was not going to be sitting around picking a guitar when I had to take care of a baby. So it's been 13 years sitting in my studio.
Got to choose one or the other. The guitar's not going to cry if you don't play it.
Very true.
Although it might sound like it's crying if you start playing it.
Or she cried because I played the guitar. Either way.
Yeah. Which was first, right? If you could go back in time and meet any musician, who would it be and why?
Oh, clearly for me, I've thought about this before. It's Mozart. I definitely want to go to a party with Mozart. Maybe I don't. I don't know. It would be fun, though.
I find many clarinetists say Mozart, Brahms, or like Mühlfeld, or someone else. Although Harry Sparney, his was one of the most interesting, and of course he recently passed away, and unfortunately, but he said he wanted to go convince Debussy to write for the bass clarinet.
Oh, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, it would have really changed history in that way. So yeah, it's interesting. I always love hearing the answer for that one.
No, I just wanted to go to a party with Mozart. I didn't even Yeah, his letters are not for the faint of heart. They are fantastic and terrible and at the same time.
Almost like modern rock stars in a way. While we're back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think I would give myself the advice to treat myself with the kindness that I treat my own clarinet students. So when I was a young student, I really brutalized myself, and I was very hard on myself. And instead of being a problem solver, I sort of took the tactic of being a spirit crusher, which wasn't the greatest method. And going back, I would say, listen, how are you going to fix this, instead of saying, wow, you keep doing it wrong? So that's the biggest advice I would have. I learned a lot by being a teacher. I never would treat my students the way I had that self-talk for myself.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when I was younger too, I was horrible at music theory, and I always felt bad about this around other musicians. And it wasn't until I was quite a bit older and I was expected to teach this that I really, really genuinely figured it out. And I was like, oh, it's just because I was never taught. I didn't have that kind of lessons. I didn't play the piano. It makes so much more sense now. And you're right, the whole process of teaching and learning to be empathetic that way is so helpful.
Yeah, music theory was my big challenge too. I didn't have a music background like what you said with piano. So that was a really hard class. Those were really hard classes for me.
I'm curious for you, because I didn't start with piano, I started with clarinet. When I visualize like chords and scales and things, I usually feel it on my fingers. I don't see a keyboard in my head.
No, I don't visualize the music either. I don't see a keyboard, and I don't see it on the paper either. I feel it. It's very kinesthetic.
Yeah, like if I need a scale, I just like, oh, how many semitones is that? I can count them off in my clarinet hand, which is ridiculous, but that's what I do.
No, and it's fun finding students in the different ways that they learn scales and arpeggios and different patterns, because there are some kids that do what you said, what we both do, which is they feel it under their fingers. And I love that about the clarinet. I feel like it feels really nice on the fingers. It makes me happy. And then there's other people that really do visualize it on the page or as a piano.
Well, I guess it makes sense, because the way I learned my scales, to be completely honest with you, was in math class on my pencil like this. When I was bored in math class, I just sat there and would practice my scales.
Your pencil clarinet.
Exactly. Speaking of advice, what was the best advice you ever got, and who gave it to you?
Oh, man, it was from David Krakauer. It was in one of my first lessons. And he told me the story of when he played with Kronos in Dreams and Prayers, the CD that he did with them. And he said, basically, don't be a jerk. Be a good person, be a nice person, work well with people, be yourself. It was great advice to go into a gig and just be a kind person and say thank you and be grateful to be there.
You remind me of some other advice someone shared. I can't remember who this was, but they said that you need to always, you never know who people might become. So you just be nice to everybody, because they could be your boss one day, or they could be the president, or they could be anybody, like way things go. What is one book you think everyone should read?
Oh, I think Liz Lerman's Critical Response Method is a great book. So she runs the Dance Exchange outside of Washington, D.C. I think she's in Bethesda, Maryland. This book talks about how to give and receive criticism. She gives a lot of analogies in it, like you're baking a cake. So instead of saying, wow, your cake is disgusting, you can say, so tell me your idea with all this salt. What are you going for? So a lot of it is it started from her frustration as a dancer when she'd ask for feedback on what she was working on. People wouldn't give feedback that was really constructive. They didn't want to hurt her feelings. They didn't know how to say it, or they would just go for it and say, that's terrible, which is also not constructive either. So it came from that side as an artist wanting feedback from people, and then as a teacher wanting to be able to give healthy feedback and start discussions with students to hear their ideas and get them to build a foundation of thinking for themselves and creating their own art.
Yeah, and we had some great conversations about education out at Clarinet Fest, so we do need to get back on that and have you on the podcast real soon here. How many clarinets do you own?
Oh, man. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 off the top of my head.
That's too many, no?
I only have 6, but they're all different sizes.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for coming on for the mini lightning round episode today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I do hope that, the listeners are going to be getting a real long reading list. I just realized it's some great books being added there, but I think everyone should check those out. So any last words before we go?
No, thank you so much for having me. Happy holidays.
Thanks for coming on the show. Thank you so much, Catina, for coming on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to hosting you for a full-length episode really soon in the future here. And wow, what another fantastic book recommendation. I think that that's just so important. especially in this day and age of social media where really anyone with a keyboard can put in their 2 cents, and they're not always the kindest 2 cents, or maybe it's, too positive. For myself, I sort of work with the philosophy where I sort of trim the fat, and what I mean by that is I take the top 10% of praise and the lowest 10% of criticism, and I sort of just disregard that. I can't remember where I learned that technique, but it's really, really important because, the top 10% of people who give you the most praise, maybe your mother or your girlfriend or whatever, sometimes, although they mean well, it's not always honest. So they might say that, that picture looks great, kind of like you talk to a young child. That picture looks great, honey, put it on the fridge here, But maybe it's actually quite a bad drawing, So you've got to sort of take that with a grain of salt, smile, don't be rude about it, but, smile and kind of move on. But look more for criticism that's more productive and going to help you get better, right? Same thing with the bottom 10%. I mean, if you take the advice that someone wrote to you on Facebook in a, midnight tirade, 3 beers in, it's probably not going to be the best advice, and you're probably not going to be any better of a person for having taken it. So I think that in this day and age especially, it's so important to really focus on good advice, good feedback, good criticism. And yeah, that's definitely a book I think would be really great to feature on the Clarineat Book Club. So like I said in the middle of the episode here, watch out for that. In the next couple weeks, I'll be announcing it, and I'm really excited about that prospect. Some of my other favorite podcasts do a book club, and there's so many great books that have appeared on here. I just think it's an awesome idea. So if this was your first time tuning into the Clarineat podcast, I want to welcome you here, and I sure hope that you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you happen to be listening. You can also keep in touch by following us on social media and joining our email mailing list. I send out updates about new content and sometimes even coupon codes for discounts on apparel and more on the website. If you'd like to get in touch directly and pass along any thoughts, guest requests, or even just to say hello, I'd really love to hear from you. Send me a message at feedback@clarineat.com. The podcast is produced by a wonderful team of volunteers now I've put together over the past few weeks, and that's one of the reasons that episodes have become a bit more sparse. We're trying to sort of figure out how to get a flow going, and, I've started a new job, and actually I'm expecting my first child in June, so it's really, really gotten crazy here. But that being said, I really do want to keep the podcast going. I've got a whole bunch of great new guests lined up, and I'm excited to get content back out on a weekly basis here, hopefully starting today. For today's episode, I'd like to thank our copy editor, Megan Taylor, audio editor, Brian Shaples, social media assistant, Tony Park, and research assistant, Brett Newton. The music that starts and ends the podcast is by Michael Lowenstern. You can check him out at earspasm.com. And I'm your host, Sean Perrin, coming to you from the freezing cold Calgary, Alberta. And yes, I know it's April 2nd, but it's actually still snowing outside, or at least it was until about 5 hours ago. So yeah, it's really been an ice cube here. We're having a super cold spring, and I hope that next time I speak with you here on the podcast, it'll be a lot warmer outside. We'll see you again soon for more of what's new and neat on the Clarineat podcast. The Clarineat podcast is brought to you in part by the support of its listeners. If you'd like to learn how you can help make the show possible, please visit clarineat.com/support. Of course, the show was also brought to you today by our season sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds. Thank you so much for listening.
Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/woodwinds.